Hey guys, how's it going? This is Watch, and in this video we're doing an ultimate smartwatch showdown. Here we're going to be taking a look at the top smartwatches that we've reviewed this year and see which one is best. In our lineup we have the Samsung Gear S, the Pebble Steel, the Moto 360, the Sony Smartwatch 3, and the LG G Watch R. So if you're interested in buying a smartwatch and you haven't yet, this is a perfect video for you. So let's go ahead and see which one is best. Now, in terms of overall physical dimensions and design, I think the LG G Watch R, Moto 360, Sony Smartwatch 3, and Pebble Steel are fairly in the same vicinity in terms of overall footprint and size. And when we take a look at the Gear S, it's certainly the largest of all of these smartwatches, measuring about 58 millimeters in terms of height and about 40 millimeters in terms of its width. And when we look at the profiles of all these watches, you can see that the Pebble and the Sony are the thinnest, and the other ones are not too much thicker. Now, in terms of the comfortability of all these smartwatches, I do have to say that none of them are really uncomfortable by any means. You can pretty much wear them all day without having any irritation or anything like that. If I were to pick one to use all day, I really do like the overall kind of feeling I get from the band that comes stock with the Sony Smartwatch 3. It's kind of a nice rubberized feel. It's sweat resistant and also very durable, and a really excellent choice. The only problem is the customization option of the different bands are fairly limited, and it's a very unique style of band versus the other ones. You can get third-party manufacturers to create different bands, and I already know that the Pebble has a lot of different options in terms of different bands, and it's using kind of a more universal traditional band system alongside with the Moto 360 and the G Watch R. Now, when we take a look at the overall build quality and design is always going to be a factor of your own personal choice. For me, I think the slickest smartwatch out of all of these is definitely a tie between the Moto 360 and the Gear S. Now, the Gear S and the Moto 360 are completely different in terms of overall design, but I like the kind of purity of the circular, clean look of the Moto 360, just being the most basic watch and kind of essential design, and I'm really a fan of that minimalistic kind of look. And the Gear S is kind of a more futuristic looking device. I love the curved screen. It's one of the most unique electronic mobile devices you're going to find out there. Definitely a unique experience using it, and that curved display definitely makes the usability and interface of it a lot more interactive and certainly more interesting to use. Now, the LG G Watch R is very similar to the Moto 360. It just has a more sportier look, a little bit more of a rugged kind of exterior. The Sony Smartwatch 3 is kind of a classic smartwatch design, being kind of more rectangular, along with the Pebble Steel, which also has a very similar design compared to the Sony. Now, in terms of build quality, pretty much all of these devices are made of a mixture between polycarbonate plastics and metal. The Samsung Gear S is the only one that's primarily made out of polycarbonate plastics, but it's still as well built as the other smartwatches. They're all water resistant and dust resistant, so you can pretty much take these in rainy weather or in kind of wet conditions or dusty conditions, and you shouldn't have any problems. Now, in terms of the control interface, the Sony, LG, Moto 360, and the Samsung are primarily using a capacitive touch display to essentially control the entire watch and all of its features. They typically have one power button. In the case on the Samsung, we have a home button that's very similar to what you find on their Samsung Galaxy smartphone, so you can use that to go home no matter where you are in the OS on the Samsung. The Moto 360 and the G Watch R also have a centralized button for power and standby. And when we take a look at the Pebble, it has the most buttons on all of these watches. It has 4 buttons in total. There is no capacitive touchscreen, but I do like its overall button interface. They feel very nice, kind of clicky, and they give you nice tactile sensation of using the device. And the navigation is very simple and straightforward, and sometimes having buttons has certain advantages than having a capacitive touchscreen, especially if you're limited in how big that screen can be. Now, all of the Android Wear devices and the Samsung are also enabled with voice command features, so you can do different things with your voice, so that means they have a built-in microphone. The Gear S also has a built-in speaker, so you can actually use it as a speakerphone. And the Gear S, by the way, is a full-on smartphone in the sense that you can actually put a SIM inside and use it as a standalone phone to send text messages and take calls and make calls and everything like that. Now at center stage, the display of all of these watches are all, I think, very adequate for each device. In terms of the overall resolution, we have the highest resolution and overall screen size on the Gear S, about 360 by 480, which is a 2-inch OLED display, which is a very similar screen technology of what the LG G Watch R is using, which is a smaller screen that has the same resolution that the Sony Smartwatch has, about 320 by 320, and the Moto 360 has a little bit lower resolution than those two Android Wear devices. And the Pebble Steel is the simplest in terms of display technology. It has a 1.26-inch display that is e-ink based, so monochromatic. It does have an LED backlight, which is nice. And we'll talk about some of the big advantages you have on the Pebble compared to battery life. It pretty much blows every other smartwatch out of the water because of its very power efficient screen. Now, in terms of sensors, all of these smartwatches are pretty fully featured. They all have accelerometers and gyroscopes so they can wake up the screen when you're actually looking at the smartwatch and turn it off when you're not. So they're kind of intelligent about that, which will also be good in terms of battery life. Now, unfortunately, the Sony Smartwatch 3 and the Pebble do not have a heart rate monitor, so that really depends if you need it or not, but the other three do have that built in, and they all work really well, which is excellent if you do a lot of exercising or monitoring your day-to-day kind of health-related activities with your heart rate. Now, in terms of connectivity, pretty much all of them are using Bluetooth and NFC to interact with your smartwatches or tablets and things like that. We actually have a lot more capabilities on the Gear S. Like I said, it's the most advanced of all these smartwatches. So we're looking at a full nano SIM compatibility. So that means it'll work for GSM and HSDPA networks. So check your different bandwidths if it's supported. But I have the international version of the Gear S, and it works excellent with all my providers that I've used it with. It also has internal Wi-Fi, so even if you don't want to use Bluetooth, you can actually connect to your Samsung phone via a Wi-Fi connection, and it works really well. Now, in terms of the internal specifications of these smartwatches, you can see that the Moto 360 is actually using a single core processor versus the other two Android Wear devices are using a dual core. We both have the exact same processor in the Sony Smartwatch 3 and the LG G Watch R, alongside with the Samsung Gear S, which is also using a dual-core processor from Qualcomm that's clocked at about 1 gigahertz, and all of them pretty much have 512 megabytes of RAM, which is more than enough for anything you're going to do on a smartwatch, although the Gear S definitely needs it because it actually has some multitasking capabilities. Now, taking a look at the Pebble Steel, it actually has a very low-spec processor compared to the other two, mainly because its custom OS doesn't need that fancy or powerful of a CPU. It's using basically a single-core M3 CPU, which is an ARM-based processor, and that only has about 128 kilobytes of RAM. Now, make no mistake about it, the Pebble is very snappy and responsive to use. Sure, it may not be as fluid and as dynamic as the other smartwatches, but it certainly gets the job done in terms of most things that you would want a smartwatch for. And that really ties well down to our next category, which is compatibility and OS. Now, the Sony Smartwatch 3, G Watch R, and Moto 360, as you know already, are Google Android Wear devices. So they're all running the same exact operating systems, and they're exclusively to work with Android Wear compatible devices. Now, that's a large list of Android-based mobile devices, whether it be smartphones or tablets, that'll work with these. So the compatibility is definitely pretty good. You can't use them on iPhone or BlackBerry or Windows Phone, unfortunately. Perhaps some people could hack it to make that happen, but natively there is no support for that besides Android devices. Now, Samsung does make a lot of other Android Wear devices, but their flagship Gear S runs exclusively on their Tizen mobile-based operating system, which is Samsung's own creation, and it exclusively will work with Samsung Galaxy line of products that are just a couple of years old. So we're talking about the Samsung Galaxy S5, the Note 4, Note 3, and if you have any other Android phone, you're kind of out of luck with official support. You can again do some kind of trickery and hack it and root your device to kind of trick the Gear S to work with your phone, but natively it only works with Samsung based devices. Now, the OS is very fully featured. It can definitely have all the capabilities of what Google Android Wear has, and some more features that I really like as well, and it's very easy to use, very intuitive, and extremely customizable. Now, the best smartwatch in terms of compatibility, hands down, has to be the Pebble Steel. It works both with iOS and Android, no matter which phone you have, if you can run the Pebble app that's available on the Google Play Store or on the Apple Store, you're pretty much good to go and you can use the Pebble. So that's really the best option in terms of cross compatibility. And if you're ever going to buy a smartwatch and perhaps you're worried about, perhaps you're going to go to an Android platform or an Apple platform down the road, this smartwatch is the right choice for you. Now, if you were to ask me which OS is the best in terms of the overall wearable category, I would have to say universally, the Android Wear is certainly the most developed right now because so many developers are on it and is using the Android-based platform. There's a lot of promise with it. Alongside with the Pebble, I think the whole architecture of how you set up the smartwatch is the easiest out of all of these. The app selection library is also pretty good and getting better and better as the company grows. But the Tizen is certainly the most underdeveloped, and it has the weakest app store, and a lot of the apps on the Tizen platform are paid, which is certainly kind of a shame because there's not a lot that you actually get right now with the Tizen app store that you couldn't get free on Android Wear or on Pebble. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about is the overall battery performance of all these smartwatches, which is certainly one of the most important components of buying a wearable device. Now, keep in mind that everybody's battery life is always going to fluctuate depending upon how many notifications they get, how they use the smartwatch, etc. And everything's going to be based upon my personal experience of using all of these smartwatches for a couple of months now. Now, we're going to rank between the worst to the best. Now, the worst definitely has to be the Moto 360, even though it doesn't have that smaller of a battery compared to everything else. The way it handles its battery management system is certainly weaker than the LG G Watch R and the Sony Smartwatch 3, which are pretty much using a little bit larger of a battery, about 410 milliamp hours on the LG and about 420 on the Sony. But basically, my experience of the Moto 360 is that it lasts anywhere between 12 to 15 hours. Now, if you do get a lot of notifications and you're using the device constantly, your battery life will suffer and you'll kind of struggle to get throughout your 12-hour day, versus the Sony Smartwatch 3 and the LG G Watch R are excellent in terms of getting throughout the day, if not a day and a half, even with moderate to heavy usage. Now, the Samsung Gear S is very impressive in terms of overall battery performance. Even though it has the largest screen, it's still using organic LED technology, and Samsung has done a lot of clever engineering to make sure that you use the least amount of battery possible when the watch is not being used. So I personally get anywhere between 2 to 2.5 days, no problem, even with moderate usage. You might have some different issues, but I'm extremely impressed of how the Samsung manages its battery system. The other cool thing about the Samsung Gear S's battery charger itself is that it actually doubles as a battery extender. So there's a built-in 350 milliamp hour battery inside the actual charging dock itself, so you can use that to extend your battery and to keep you going throughout the day if you need it. Now, if you're going to pick a smartwatch solely on its battery performance, hands down the winner has to be the Pebble Steel. It basically gets anywhere between 5 to 7 days of battery life, even with moderate to heavy usage. It's basically using a very efficient e-ink display, which is definitely going to save you a lot in terms of battery life. Additionally, you don't really have to turn on the backlight too much because it could be backlit with any kind of ambient light source, so you can kind of glance at the watch and not turn on the LED backlight. Additionally, because of its lower architecture, internal specifications, and overall operating system, you are saving a lot there as well. So even though it might not have all the different advanced features of the other smartwatches, it certainly makes it up in terms of that battery performance. But on that, guys, that's really it. If you have any specific questions about anything I talked about in this video, please make sure to leave a comment down below. And also let me know which smartwatch you would prefer if you were to actually buy one. Do you like some of the aspects of the Pebble of being cross-compatible, or would you go full out with the most powerful smartwatch out there, the Samsung Gear S, or any of the other great Android Wear devices? So definitely love to hear your thoughts, and we'll see you later. Take care.